As I entered Rosemary's Bistro's busy kitchen, the aroma of warm sauces and freshly baked goods filled the room. I was attempting to calm my anxieties for the next day when my hands began to shake a little as I adjusted my chef's hat. "Nora, where's that pie with lemon meringue for table 6? From across the room, Chef Carlos growled. "Coming straight up, Chef." I returned the phone, sounding more certain than I actually was. I quickly made my way to the dessert stand and gingerly took the pie out of the fridge. My phone beeped in my pocket as I turned to give it. I set it aside and concentrated on the work at hand. I said, "Here you go, Chef," and presented the pie with style. Carlos gave a sharp nod. "That's not too awful, Nora. Start working on those eclairs for the Johnsons' anniversary celebration now." With a sigh of relief, I returned to my station. My phone started buzzing again as I started to pipe the choux pastry. I sneaked a short peek at the screen out of curiosity and saw that Smith had missed 2 calls. A beat skipped in my heart. Smith was the man I had dated for more than 10 years, my high school sweetheart. We'd been having some difficult times lately, but I knew we could work things out. We always did. "Earth to Nora." I was shocked out of my trance by a voice. From across the counter, I saw my amiable coworker Patrick smiling at me. "Are you all right? You appear to have witnessed a ghost." I faked a laugh. "I'm not sick. I'm just a bit preoccupied. How's the progress on those eclairs?" Patrick glinted in the eyes. "Oh, you know me. I'm the king of cream puffs." Grateful for the diversion, I chuckled. "Keep that from being heard by Chef Carlos. He may need you to demonstrate it in a bake-off." I couldn't get rid of the persistent sensation that something wasn't right while we worked side by side. Smith did not contact me during my shifts, unless there was an urgent matter. The remainder of the day was a haze of butter, wheat, and sugar. I was tired, but proud of my efforts for the day when I hung up my apron. My phone rang again as I went outside into the cold evening air. The name of Smith flickered on the screen. "Hey, honey," I said, attempting to speak informally. "What's going on with the calls today?" On the other end, there was a prolonged silence. "Nora, we need to talk." My stomach fell out. Nothing positive ever came from those 4 words. I said, "Okay," very slowly. "I'm about to leave work. Do you want me to visit?" "No," he curtly said. "Let's meet at Riverfront Park, our usual spot." A quarter of an hour later, I discovered Smith seated on our preferred bench with a view of the river. He appeared older and more solemn than I had ever seen him because of the lengthy shadows the dying sun threw across his face. "What's going on, Smith?" As I sat down next to him, I inquired. He inhaled deeply. "Nora, I can't do this any longer." It was as though I had taken a hit to the belly. "What are you trying to say? Us? This partnership? It isn't functioning. We couldn't look at each other." "I think we both know it's been over for a while now." "No," I said in a murmur that was hardly heard over the sound of the breaking water. "This is something we can address. We consistently do." Smith gave a head shake. "Nora, not this time. I apologize, but I've decided." My eyes watered as the truth of what he had spoken dawned on me. "Is there someone else?" I only needed his quiet to know the answer. With a start, I got up, my legs trembling. "For how long? How long, please tell me." With a raised voice, I demanded. He let out a sigh. "A few months. It simply happened. I didn't intend for it to." I staggered backward, experiencing a sensation of the earth collapsing beneath my feet. A sudden destruction of 12 years of memories, hopes, and goals. "I hope you two will have a very happy life together," I spat out and turned over. I suddenly knew that my life would never be the same as I turned to leave the one guy I had ever loved behind. The road ahead was unclear, paved with heartbreak and obstacles I had not yet realized would arise. However, one thing was certain. Nora Hayes and I would need to figure out how to pick myself up and move on. The weeks that followed Smith's treachery blended together in a mist of grief and vanilla flavoring. I put all of my energy into my job, attempting valiantly to bridge the gap he had left. However, my tongue detected bitterness in even the tastiest cakes. I was struggling with a batch of macarons that was acting strangely one very demanding day when I felt a soft touch on my shoulder. "Hey, Nora, why don't you take a break?" Patrick's kind voice broke through my annoyance. I sighed and wiped my cheek with a smear of powdered sugar. "I am unable to. These must be flawless for tomorrow's Johnson wedding." Patrick's worried eyes wrinkled. "Recently, you've been pushing yourself too much. Come on, I'll take care of it. Please, just 15 minutes. I reluctantly nodded and went with him to the little courtyard that was located behind the cafe. The kitchen was stuffy, so the fresh October air was a wonderful change. Patrick leaned against the brick wall and said, "So, would you like to talk about what's really bothering you?" After a moment of hesitation, the words came out quickly. "I lost Smith to someone else, 12 years later. Simply vanished." Patrick's expression softened with compassion. "Oh, I apologize so much. That is very bad." "I feel like such a fool," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I believed we were content. I believed there was hope for us." "Hey, you're not a moron," Patrick firmly stated. "You put your faith in a loved one. That is not foolish in the slightest." His words soothed my hurting heart like a balm. I had a flicker of optimism that maybe, just maybe, I might be okay for the first time in weeks. Days later, Patrick became my pillar of support. He made me laugh with his awful jokes, covered for me when I needed time to gather myself, and gradually helped me come out of my shell. Patrick gave me a little velvet box as a surprise one evening as we were closing the cafe. "What's this?" Confused, I inquired. He gave a sheepish smile. "Just a little something to remind you that you're not alone." A little locket in the form of a heart was inside the box. I drew my finger over the fine engraving, gasping. "Patrick, this is so wonderful, but I just can't deal with it. It's excessive." He gave a headshake. "It's not excessive. It serves as a friendship gesture to let you know that nice people still exist and are concerned about you." As I wore the locket around my neck, tears started to rise up in my eyes. "I'm grateful," I muttered. "I'll keep it always." Weeks become months, and I started to look forward to seeing Patrick every day. His kind smile and steadfast support gradually began to heal the rifts in my heart. Our hands touched one Saturday when we worked side by side on a massive wedding cake. I felt a sudden electrical shock and sprang aside, almost tipping over the cake. Patrick said, "Whoa there," as he laughed and steadied the cake. "You okay?" With my cheeks heating, I nodded. What went wrong with me? Patrick is a friend and colleague of mine. It is impossible for me to fall in love with him, is it? I was playing with the locket unconsciously that night as I lay in bed. I smiled as thoughts of Patrick flooded my thoughts. I had a wave of anticipation for the future for the first time since Smith's departure. My father texted me when I woke up the following morning. As I read his brief message, my stomach dropped. "We need to talk. Visit the home following work." Anxiety tore at me all day. I had never been close to Dad, especially following Mom's death. What on earth would he want to talk about? That evening, when I approached his ancient farmhouse, I noticed him sitting on the porch with a somber expression on his face. I said, "Hello, Dad," as I carefully ascended the rickety stairs. He gave a quick nod. "Nora, please enter. I have something to say." I crouched uneasily on the edge of the sofa as I followed him into the messy living room. After pacing for a while, Dad looked at the necklace around my neck and turned to face me. He insisted, "Where did you get that?" My hand instinctively went to the pendant. It was a gift from a coworker friend. Why? Dad's expression hardened. A buddy, really? Does this acquaintance have a chance to be that Patrick guy you keep bringing up? His tone baffled me, and I scowled. Yes, but... Nora, he interrupted, his tone solemn and low. I want you to stop seeing that man. I promise. He's trouble. My chest erupted in anger. What topic are you discussing? You've never even met him. Dad's mouth tightened. I know enough, and I'm telling you as your father to stay separate from him. With trembling hands, I got up. I can't be told who I should be friends with by you. Dad, I'm not a child anymore. The words of my father rang in my ears as I rushed out of the home. I didn't know everything about Patrick, but he did. And why did a doubtful thought germinate in my heart, even though I was furious? For days after, I couldn't shake my father's warning concerning Patrick. I made an effort to ignore it, telling myself that he was simply being too cautious, but uncertainty persisted like a nagging shadow. When I arrived at the bistro one morning, Patrick greeted me with a brilliant smile. Good morning. I'm going to surprise you. He showed me to the kitchen, where a gorgeous display of pastries was waiting for me. I've been working on the French skills you taught me. How do you feel? I felt pride and love fill my heart. How could my father have thought this man was dangerous? I squeezed Patrick's hand and murmured, They're perfect, Patrick. You're amazing. As he drew me in, his eyes gleamed. Not as amazing as you. I didn't realize until his lips were on mine. The kiss was tender, pleasant, and comforting. I was out of breath when we broke up. For so long, muttered Patrick, I've wanted to do that. With a smile on my face, I forgot about my father's caution. Me too. The following several months were filled with unending joy. Like we did with our baking, Patrick and I immersed ourselves into our relationship. We had the impression that we were living in our own little fairy tale at every turn. Patrick surprised me with a picnic at the park, where Smith had crushed my heart on a cool fall evening. He got down on one knee as we sat on a blanket under a canopy of glittering fairy lights. Nora, you've brought so much joy into my life, he added, his voice brimming with emotion. Are you going to marry me? I nodded, happy tears streaming down my cheeks. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. I traveled to my father's house the following day, excited to break the news. However, I spotted him sitting on the porch with a thunderous expression as soon as I drew up. I heard about your engagement, he said as I drew near. I asked, How did you... Little town, he cut in. News spreads quickly. I implore you, Nora, please don't do this. My chest erupted in anger. Dad, I adore him. Could you please just be happy for me? He hissed, because I know men like him. On the exterior, charming, but inside, rotting. You will be damaged by him, I know. You don't know a thing about him, I yelled. You've never granted him a chance. Dad's expression relaxed a little. Please, Nora. Mother of yours would... I said, don't you dare drag Mom into this. She would have wanted me to be happy. He said, she would have wanted you to be smart. I turned to go after we stood in an uncomfortable quiet for a time. Dad, I'm getting married to Patrick, with or without your approval. I made up my mind as I drove off, tears clouding my eyes. I didn't need my father in my life if he couldn't accept the man I loved. The weeks before the wedding passed quickly as we got ready and made plans. Patrick was a delight, taking meticulous care of every little thing with excitement. However, as the big day got closer, a persistent sensation in the pit of my stomach increased. I fidgeted the locket Patrick had given me as I stood in front of the mirror on the morning of our wedding, dressed in my white gown. I was startled by a knock at the door. Nora, my dad's rough voice said, Can I come in? After a moment of hesitation, I yelled, It's open. Looking uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit, he came in. His eyes were wide when he saw how I looked. He whispered, "You look just like your mother." I briefly regretted our separation, but then I thought back to his critical remarks on Patrick. "What do you wish, Dad?" I questioned icily. He let out a deep sigh. "I came to give you this." He extended a little tattered package. "It comes from your mom. Before she passed away, she had me write it and promised to present it to you on your wedding day." I took the packet with nervous hands. There was a single sheet of paper inside, written in my mom's well-known handwriting. Tears filled my eyes as I read her wise and kind comments. However, the final words, "Trust your instincts, my darling," chilled my blood. Something is most likely off if it seems off. With a mixture of terror and perplexity in my heart, I glanced up at my father. "Dad, what?" All of a sudden, there was a disturbance outside. Patrick's cheeks reddened with rage as he ran in as the door exploded open. He glared at my father and asked, "What's he doing here?" I had no clue what to do as I stood there, torn between the two guys, and it dawned on me that this was the moment that would determine the rest of my life. Our marriage's honeymoon phase passed more quickly than a soufflé that was taken out of the oven too soon. After our return from Bali, I observed little behavioral shifts in Patrick within a few weeks. His once warm grins were strained and tight-lipped. His soft touches became forceful snatches. Patrick slammed his suitcase on the counter as he came in one evening when I was cooking supper in our new kitchen. "Rough day?" I asked, trying not to seem too serious. He gave me a scowl. "What's this?" He displayed a letter. When I saw the return address, my heart fell. It's just a card from my dad." Patrick's gaze grew strained. "I thought I had instructed you to break things up with him. Nora, he's nothing but trouble." I mumbled, "He's my father," in protest. Patrick angrily said, "He's a small-town nobody who fails to comprehend our world, just like your mother was." The wooden spoon that I was holding fell to the ground with a clatter. "What did you say about my mother?" Patrick's mouth twisted in distaste. "Oh, Nora, hurry up. We both understand that Mom was merely a lucky country girl who married your father. It makes sense why you ended up the way you did." My eyes watered as I tried to identify the man in front of me. This couldn't be the same Patrick who had given me such a sweet hug and assured me that he would always love me. "How dare you?" I said to myself. "You don't know anything about my mother." He chuckled icily. "I have sufficient knowledge. Additionally, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, my dear." I had a slap-like feeling. What's that supposed to mean? Patrick came charging at me, a gleam in his eyes. "It implies that you are identical to her. Feeble, unsophisticated, constantly blaming others." I retreated from him, my hands shaking. I said, "Patrick, please, this isn't you." "Oh, yes," with a sneer. "You just never bothered to see it, too busy living in your little imaginary world of sugar and spice." My father was correct all along, I realized with horror as his words began to sink in. Patrick was not who I had assumed him to be. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. Patrick's hurtful remarks started to happen every day. He made fun of my ambitions to start my own bakery, berated my cooking, and told me repeatedly how fortunate I was to have been saved from my pathetic small-town life. I gave my everything to my work at the bistro, clinging to the enthusiasm that had made me who I was. But Patrick's impact was evident, even there, like poison. I was getting ready for a big catering event one afternoon, when Patrick dropped by out of the blue. "What are you doing here?" I questioned, attempting to control my shaking voice. He grinned. "Just keeping up on my little wifey, making sure you're not embarrassing me." His mouth curled in disdain as he gazed over my shoulder at the elaborate sugar flowers I'd been creating. He sneered, "Is this really the best you can do?" No wonder you're continuing to be trapped in this dead-end job. A part of me broke. Enough, Patrick. You may stop talking to me in this manner. His eyes flickered erratically. Well, and how are you going to handle that? Go from me? I hope you manage without me, my love. Without me, you have no value. I clasped the heart-shaped locket around my neck as he rushed off, leaving me terrified and embarrassed in front of my coworkers. It seemed like a cord connecting me to a guy I no longer recognized, despite the symbol of love and hope it once represented. I made up my mind that night when I laid in our bed and heard Patrick's gentle snores next to me. I have to stop living this way. I needed to get out of there. But while I worked out my escape strategy, a terrifying notion halted me in my tracks. And supposing Patrick was correct, what if, in reality, without him, I was nothing? I became fearfully paralyzed as the skepticism began to seep in. I knew I was at a crossroads as the first rays of morning peeked through the curtains. I had two options. Either I would jump into the unknown and risk everything for the possibility of freedom, or I would stay and put up with Patrick's violence, holding on to the memory of the guy I believed I'd married. It was my decision, and my decision alone. However, when I ran my fingers over the locket around my neck, I couldn't help but think of my mother's advice in her letter. My darling, trust your instincts. Something is most likely off if it seems off. I took a big breath and decided. All I had to do now was summon the bravery to go through with it. On a brisk autumn morning, I woke up early, my heart heavy with intention. It was my mother's birthday today, and I was determined to celebrate her life by making her signature apple spice cake, the only thing I knew how to do. I could just hear her voice directing me through the process as I gathered the ingredients. "Remember, Nora," she'd reply, "the secret is in the love you put into it." I meticulously worked on each layer for hours, filling it with recollections of better times. The perfume of nutmeg and cinnamon filled the kitchen, providing a welcome diversion from the continual anxiety that pervaded our home. I was just putting the last touches on the icing when Patrick suddenly bragged into the kitchen. He glared at the cake, asking, "What the hell is this?" "It's my mother's birthday today," I said, avoiding eye contact. "I made her favorite cake." Patrick snorted. "Please stop with your mushy rambling. Nora, get over it. No, this is not a fable." I steadied myself by inhaling deeply. "You're right," I firmly stated. "No, this is not a fable. I've had enough of acting like it is." I held my ground and Patrick's eyes widened in shock. "What are you saying?" "Patrick, I'm announcing my departure. This has concluded. You are no longer permitted to treat me in this manner." He appeared to be about to blow up for a brief minute. Then a snarl distorted his features. "All right. Now go ahead and depart. You'll slink back into it. You always succeed." But I knew that this time I wouldn't as I left the room with the heart-shaped locket still on my neck. I was free at last this time. Taking at the disarray on the countertops, Patrick made a demand. "This cake is for my mother's birthday," I said, taking a big breath to collect myself. "I make it every year to remember her." A sneer distorted Patrick's cheeks. "Again? Your mother? Nora, when are you going to accept the past? It is pitiful." His remarks hurt, but I didn't want to show him how much. "Patrick, this matters to me. If you could honor that, I would really appreciate that." He chuckled icily. "For what purpose is respect intended? A recipe from a dead woman." He walked up to the cake and stuck his finger into the beautiful icing before I could even blink, destroying the pattern I had spent hours crafting. "Stop it!" I tried to shove him away while crying, but Patrick was stronger. Gripping the cake with a sly twinkle in his eye, he strode over to the garbage pail. I pleaded, "No, please," as tears ran down my cheeks. Patrick, don't. It was already too late. He threw the entire cake, icing side down, into the trash in one rapid move. With disbelief, I gazed at the garbage can, my mother's recipe that I had loved so much reduced to a crumbly mass of frosting and crumbs. Patrick remarked, "There," as he used a dish towel to wipe his hands. "Now you can focus on more important things, like being a proper wife." Something inside me broke as he joyfully whistled out of the kitchen. This was about more than simply a cake. It was about my background, my memories, and everything that shaped who I am. I fell to the ground, my body aching with tears. How could it have happened this far? How could I have missed Patrick's actual nature for so long? I remembered my mother teaching me how to bake as she was standing in this very kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of my botched product. With sparkling eyes, she murmured, "Nora, never forget that you're composed of more resilient materials than just sugar and flour. You pick yourself up after being knocked down by life and try again." I got to my feet slowly. I reached into the garbage and took the cake with nervous hands. While everything was in disarray, it wasn't entirely gone. I put in endless hours trying to rescue all I could during the following few hours. To hide the flaws, I filled in the holes, filled in the dents, and covered the faults with fresh embellishments. The cake wasn't flawless by the time I was done, but it was entire once again. Upon observing my work, I came to the realization that it was a shattered yet intact mirror of who I am. I made a choice at that very time. Although Patrick was unchangeable, I could control my reaction to him. No more running away from him, no more groveling. I picked up my vehicle keys and carefully closed the cake's box. I was supposed to see this person, as I made my way to my father's residence. My hands were firmly on the steering wheel. This visit was long overdue, even though I knew it wouldn't be simple. When I arrived into his driveway, the sun had already set, leaving the overgrown yard with lengthy shadows. I took a big breath, and holding the cake, I got out of the car. The front door sprang open before I could even knock. With a mix of astonishment and anxiety on his weathered face, my father stood there. "Nora," he sternly said, "what are you doing here?" I whispered a little as I held out the ruined cake. "Mom's birthday. Dad, I guess I need your assistance." I saw the first flicker of optimism in months as comprehension appeared in his eyes. This was only the start of a new chapter in my tale, one in which I would gather my courage and fight for the life I was rightfully entitled to. It wasn't the end. The weeks that followed my visit to Dad's residence were a haze of private conversations and discussions. I started making plans with his assistance to get out of Patrick's smothering hold. But like overcooked pie crust, my anxieties strained as the reckoning day drew near. I braced myself for the most difficult talk of my life one brisk October morning. I placed a dish of his favorite food, French toast, in front of Patrick, while he sat at the kitchen table and scowled at his phone. "Patrick," I said, sounding more composed than I actually was, "we need to talk." His face flickered with displeasure as he looked up. "Nora, what is it now? I have a lot on my plate." I inhaled deeply. "I want a divorce." The words were heavy and stifling, hanging in the air like a fog. Patrick merely looked at me for a while, his expression blank. Then he burst out laughing without notice. "A divorce?" he asked snidely. "Stop being absurd. To what place would you go? How would you respond? Remember that without me, you are nothing." His once cutting remarks now seemed empty. I positioned my shoulders squarely. "I've already had a legal consultation. Patrick, I'm leaving today." His expression went from one of enjoyment to a chilly rage that I'd seen far too often. He rose slowly and towered over me. "You ungrateful bitch," with a growl. "After all I've done for you, what now? Without me, all you would be is a small-town nobody. I winced, but did not back down. Maybe so, but I'd rather be a nobody than live another day like this. A haze of movement and anguish ensued next. My cheek was struck by Patrick's palm, and the power of the slap sent me backward. Curling my face in my hands, I felt an odd serenity descend upon me. This was the last push I required. I appreciate it, I muttered. Patrick blinked, his wrath giving way to perplexity. What? I thank you once again for revealing your true self to me. I'll never forget it. I shot for the door before he could say anything. I had my stuff packed and stashed in my car's trunk. I saw Patrick in the rearview mirror, his angry face twisted as I pulled out of the driveway. Driving with adrenaline pumping through my veins caused my hands to tremble. I had completed it. Now, at last, I was free. But I didn't feel the relief I had anticipated. Rather, I was in danger of being overtaken by a debilitating wave of dread and doubt. Now what? To what place would I go? How could I make it through? My phone buzzed, as though in response to my quiet inquiries. Jessica, the owner of Sweet Dreams Bakery in the nearby town, sent me a text message. If you choose to, you can have the job. When are you able to begin? I let out a shocked laugh. It was actually happening. I was starting again. I stopped at a rest area to gather myself. I looked at my image in the rearview mirror as I sat there attempting to get my breathing under control. I could immediately feel the bruise from Patrick's strike on my cheek. My anger erupted within me, burning fiercely. How can he attempt to shatter me, to diminish me? Something inside of me changed at that very instant. Though anxiety and uncertainty persisted, they were now joined by a resolve. Even though I had lost everything, I wasn't going to let Patrick break me. Grabbing my phone, I gave Jessica a call. Hello, this is Nora. I am able to begin right now. I discovered my father had missed a call as I was wrapping up the call. As I kept my thumb on the return call button, a knot started to develop in my throat. Things were still tense between us, even if we had made progress. What if he believed that I was weak for allowing Patrick to get this close to me? I hit the call before I had a chance to second think to myself. Once and twice it rang. Nora? My dad's gruff voice rang out over the speaker. Are you all right? Did you complete it? I drew in a nervous breath. Indeed, Dad, I completed it. I'm not bound. After a lengthy silence, I thought he had hung up. Then he whispered, I'm proud of you, kiddo, in a tone that was nearly too quiet for anybody to hear. My eyes welled up with tears, a mixture of hope, anguish, and relief. I came to the realization that this was not the conclusion of my tale, but rather the beginning of a new one, in which I would rebuild my life, regain my strength, and maybe even find happiness once again as I drove back onto the highway toward my new existence. I had no idea, though, that the most difficult portion of my voyage was still to come. My phone rang sharply in the early morning, shattering the quiet. Feeling groggy, I went for it, my pulse racing as I noticed the caller ID, Mrs. Wilson, Dad's neighbor. Her voice wavered as she spoke. Nora, I'm so sorry, darling. Your dad is no longer with us. The world appeared to tilt, and I sat there dumbfounded as Mrs. Thompson's words overcame me. A calm heart attack while he slept. Peaceful sounded like a cruel joke. The last several years had not been tranquil in our relationship, and just when things were starting to get better. In a cloud of sadness and remorse, I went through Dad's stuff and planned the funeral throughout the next several days. Every chore served as an agonizing reminder of the time we had wasted. The cloudy and dismal morning of the funeral reflected my feelings exactly. I was overcome with a profound sense of loss as I stood in front of the mirror, attaching the heart-shaped locket Patrick had given me years ago. A gust of resentment swept through me. If I had listened to Dad's cautions concerning Patrick, might things have turned out differently? I was surprised by how many people came to pay their respects at the cemetery. Dad was a recluse by nature, yet it seems that he had a greater impact on lives than I was aware of. I looked around the congregation as the pastor was speaking and saw Patrick at the back, his face plastered on a fake look of sorrow. My own anger surged. After all he had done, how could he still be here? I nearly missed the minister's last remarks. And now Nora would like to say a few words about her father, since I was paying so much attention to Patrick. I was overcome with panic as I approached the podium. How could I put it? How could I sum up a lifetime of happiness, heartbreak, and chances lost? I inhaled deeply and touched my neck's locket without realizing it. I had an epiphany on what to say. "My father was a difficult man to love," I murmured, my voice faltering. He was fiercely in love and gave his all to protect those he cared about, but he was also stubborn, set in his ways, and not very good at showing his feelings. I saw Patrick squirming uncomfortable toward the back while I was speaking. Even though I was unwilling to listen, he made an effort to warn me about the risks in my life. And in the end, he was there for me when I most needed him. All I want is... Tears were running down my face as I broke my voice. All I wanted was more time to tell him how much he meant to me. The audience erupted into an odd stillness as I left the stage. Patrick, to my dismay, came up to me. "Nora," he replied, his tone betraying a phony sense of worry. "I deeply regret your loss." He went on, "I know this is a difficult time, but there's something we need to discuss," as I stiffened, ready to face him. His eyes strayed to the pendant hanging around my neck. "That necklace, didn't it belong to your father?" I said incoherently. "No, you gave this to me." A shivering smile twisted Patrick's lips. "Actually, years ago I purchased it from your father. I saw a chance, and he needed money. It's a highly valued family heirloom. Since he's gone, I would like you to return it." The truth struck me again, tilting the universe as it did. Dad had sold a family heirloom to Patrick, who had given it to me knowing full well what it was really worth. I growled, tightly gripping the locket. "You're lying." Patrick became icy-eyed. "I'm telling the truth. You'll turn it over right now, unless you want things to go nasty." Something inside me broke as we stood there, engaged in a wordless deadlock. I had already lost so much to this man, including years of my life, my self-worth, and my confidence. And now he wants to take away my last remaining link to my father. My voice was tougher than how I felt when I responded. "No, I won't give this to you. You are never going to take anything more from me." Patrick grabbed for the locket, his face contorted with anger. However, the confrontation was broken off before he could seize it by a firm voice. "Is something wrong here?" Turning, we both saw Jacob standing close, a well-respected local businessman and my father's oldest friend. He faced Patrick, his once twinkling eyes now as stern as stone. I felt a flicker of optimism as Jacob moved to the side. Perhaps I was not as alone as I had believed in my battle. Patrick and I felt as though there was a wall between us because of Jacob's massive presence, which dominated the cemetery. There was a noticeable sense of tension in the air. "Mr. Hawthorne, this is a private matter between my wife and me." Patrick started with a fake air of charm in his voice. Jacob's gaze grew strained. "I think she's an ex-wife, and I'm concerned about everything that has to do with Nora's welfare. Especially now." I was overcome with gratitude for Jacob, but Patrick was not going to back down. Patrick pointed to the necklace I was wearing and stated, "That locket is a valuable antique. I own it." Jacob raised his eyebrows. "Is that accurate? It's funny. Years ago, George showed me that locket. It was a family treasure intended for Nora," he added. Patrick's expression flushed. "That is untrue. I can vouch for my purchase." Dangerously serene was Jacob's voice. Considering that I was with George when he had the locket evaluated, I would be quite intrigued to see that. Isn't it, Patrick, worth a tiny fortune? Suddenly, the parts fit together perfectly. Feeling had never been the reason behind Patrick's desire that I wear the locket or his anger when I misplaced it. Money has always been the main focus. I said, "You knew," my voice quivering with rage. "You knew what it was worth all along." At last, Patrick's facade of politeness gave down. What would happen if I did? Just as you were too foolish to see its value, you were also too foolish to recognize your own worthlessness. Though they were piercing and cutting, his words did not injure me this time. Rather, an odd serenity descended upon me. "No, Patrick," I responded in a firm tone. "I won't give this to you. You are never going to take anything more from me," I firmly responded. "The only worthless thing here is you." Jacob moved forward before Patrick could respond. "Mr. Hawthorne, I believe it is time for you to depart. Additionally, I would suggest not harassing Nora in the future. Unless, of course, you want me to think again about the business arrangement we talked about last week." Although wrath distorted Patrick's face, he realized he was lost. He shot me one final vicious stare and rushed off, leaving behind a trail of angry footsteps. My knees started to get weak as the adrenaline from the encounter subsided. Jacob supported me with his strong hand. "You all right, child?" he inquired tenderly. I couldn't get the knot in my throat to go away, so I nodded. Jacob led me to a bench close by, out of the line of the lingering mourners' inquisitive looks. He said, "Your dad would be proud of you. He always sensed that you were capable of defending yourself." My eyes filled with tears. I broke down in speech and said, "I just wish I'd done it sooner. I wish Patrick had told me what he knew." Jacob gave a headshake. "George was more perceptive than you realize. He understood that you had to blaze your own trail and make your own errors. He left you because of that." With a melancholic smile, he took an envelope out of his jacket pocket and gave it to me. He requested that I give it to you following the funeral. I shook my hands and opened the envelope. Enclosed came a missive written in my dad's well-known script. "Nora, if you are reading this, it indicates that I was unable to express my pride in you to you face to face. Sweetheart, you've always been stronger than you realized. You've been through difficult circumstances before, and you will persevere through whatever is ahead. There is more to the locket you are wearing than just jewelry. It represents your origins and the tenacity of the ladies in our family. Wearing that, your great-grandmother established a new life in a foreign land. Wearing that, your grandma managed the family farm by herself during the war. And your mom wore it every day of her life, overcoming every obstacle with grace and determination. It's your time now. Wear it proudly, Nora. And never forget that you are the strongest person among us all because you come from a long history of survivors. Little one, you are loved. I have always had, and I always will." I saw a change in myself as soon as I completed reading. I felt a sudden feeling of power and purpose take the place of the pain and remorse I had been carrying. I raised my gaze to Jacob, who was observing me with a sly grin. "Now what do I do?" With my voice almost audible, I inquired. He gave a very little laugh. "Nora, you're living now. With all that love and strength, you create the life you've always wanted. Both your father and I have faith in you. It's time for you to have self-confidence." I got up and felt a wave of resolve as I had my hand firmly around the locket. Although Patrick was gone, not everything was stolen by him. I still had a bright future ahead of me, my mother's strength, and my father's affection. I felt so free for the first time in a long time. I felt certain that I could overcome any obstacles that came my way, holding my head high and my heart full of optimism. Nora Hawthorne's tale wasn't coming to an end.